Hola, what's the weather like where you are today? Sunny, rainy, cloudy? Comment below.
At my baby shower, right in the middle of the toast, while everyone was sipping pink lemonade and nibbling on overpriced cupcakes shaped like rattles, my mother said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear, "Your sister would have been a better mom." I smiled, didn't blink, turned to the guest of honor and said, "Funny, that's what the court thought too, when they gave me custody of her child." The room went ice cold, the kind of cold that doesn't come from the weather, but from something older, deeper, and a hell of a lot messier than frosting and party favors. The thing is, that baby shower was supposed to be the happy ending. I had waited years for this moment, not just for the pregnancy, but for something normal, something sweet and celebrated. Like a life event that didn't end in some kind of emotional explosion or courtroom drama. I'd finally met someone kind, stable, someone who wanted the same things I did. His name is Daniel, and he's probably the only man I've ever trusted completely, which, considering my history, is saying a lot. And now, I was 7.5 months pregnant, carrying my first biological child, glowing with the kind of forced optimism that only therapy and prenatal vitamins could produce. We kept the shower small, backyard, nothing fancy, just a rented tent, some friends from work, a few neighbors, and family. My friend Kate from HR planned most of it, including the games and the dumb little guess the baby food contest. It was fine, normal, until my mom opened her mouth. She hadn't been invited, not really. She was what you'd call a default guest, technically family, so leaving her off the list would have been more trouble than it was worth. She showed up an hour late, in one of her too tight dresses and an overpowering cloud of floral perfume, holding a poorly wrapped box of baby wipes and the kind of facial expression that made you feel like you should apologize just for being born. She hugged me like we were close, said something passive about me finally catching up to Amanda, and then set herself up at the center table like she was running the whole show. People tried to ignore her. She's always been a little much. But then when Daniel's mom raised a glass and said something sweet about the strength it takes to raise a child, my mom couldn't help herself. She said, "Strength's one thing, but some people just don't have the instinct." Amanda always had it. She would have been the better mom. She didn't whisper. She didn't laugh it off like a joke. She said it like a fact, like she was reading it off a damn plaque, as if everyone in that yard hadn't watched me become a mom in every way but biology for the last 5 years. The air around us changed. Conversation stopped. Forks hovered midair. A few people looked at their drinks, maybe hoping it was strong enough to make this all a bad dream. I didn't flinch. I just looked over at Lily, yes, the guest of honor, and said loud enough for the whole damn yard, "Funny, that's what the court thought too, when they gave me custody of her child." Now I know what you're thinking. Harsh. Cruel even. And yeah, I won't lie. It felt like cutting a nerve open with a scalpel. But there's something you need to understand. That child, Lily, wasn't just a legal win for me. She was my niece, my heartbeat, the only person in this messed up family who didn't treat love like a limited currency. I didn't take her from Amanda. Amanda gave her away, one breakdown at a time. My mom blinked hard, like someone had thrown a cold bucket of water on her. She looked around, maybe hoping someone would defend her, but all she got was silence. Even Daniel's dad, who usually avoids conflict like it's contagious, shifted in his chair and muttered something under his breath. The worst part wasn't what she said. It was that she believed it. She really, truly believed Amanda, my train wreck of a sister, would have made a better mother just because she was born first, just because she used to win trophies for dance and get invited to country club brunches. Never mind that Amanda once left Lily in a hot car while she ran in real quick to pick up a prescription that wasn't even hers. Never mind that the same woman had lost custody, not once, but twice. None of that mattered to my mom. To her, bloodlines trump behavior, appearances beat reality. And no matter what I did, I was never going to be the daughter she saw when she closed her eyes and imagined perfection. After I dropped the bomb, I turned back to my plate and took a bite of quiche that suddenly tasted like burnt plastic. The guests shifted in their seats. Some started quietly gathering plates. Others pretended to check their phones. My best friend leaned in and whispered, "Jesus, Meg." And I just said, "She started it." Janice didn't speak again. She just sat there, eyes flicking back and forth between me and Lily, like she was doing the mental math on how everything went so wrong. Eventually, she got up and left without saying goodbye, which honestly was a first. Later that evening, when everyone had gone home and the folding chairs were stacked by the fence, I went inside and opened the drawer in the hallway. Tucked between unopened mail and old birthday cards was the envelope I had written months ago. On the front, in black ink, "For Amanda, do not open until after the shower." It wasn't a letter of love. It wasn't a peace offering. It was something else entirely, something I never meant to use unless I had to. I stood there staring at it, thinking about how this all started, about how being the lesser daughter had become a kind of identity, and how maybe, just maybe, I was done letting that be true. I sealed the flap again, walked outside barefoot, and slipped it into the mailbox. No stamp. She'd know who it was from, and she'd know what it meant. I went back inside and sat next to Lily on the couch. She was coloring, nothing fancy, just stick figures and scribbles, but when I looked at her face, I saw peace. Not perfection, not some hallmark moment, just quiet, safe peace. "Can I have a brother?" she asked without looking up. I smiled, finally for real this time. "Maybe," I said, "but let's not tell Grandma, okay?" She nodded and kept coloring, and I kept watching, listening to the silence that followed, wondering just how far down the rabbit hole the rest of the story would go. And trust me, this was just the first step. They always said Amanda was born with a halo, and while I don't remember the actual day she entered the world, being just a toddler myself, I do remember the way our entire household bent around her presence like vines toward sunlight, as if the gravitational pull of her existence had rearranged the furniture, the rules, the expectations, and most of all, the way our mother saw the world. From the very beginning, Amanda was the chosen one, the prototype of maternal pride, the walking embodiment of every hope our mother ever had for herself but never managed to realize. Blonde, blue-eyed, a natural performer with that saccharine, pageant-worthy smile that made strangers fawn over her in grocery store aisles, and teachers assumed she could do no wrong even when she was dead wrong. And me, I was just Megan. I came second. I came quieter. I came with fewer expectations but far more criticism. The kind that never sounded loud until it started echoing in your head long after bedtime. Growing up in our house was like living in a two-tier system, only we weren't in different rooms. We were right next to each other, breathing the same air, attending the same schools, eating the same food. Yet somehow Amanda always seemed to get the larger slice, the warmer hug, the benefit of the doubt when the vase was broken or the test score was low. She was the star, and I was the understudy who never got a shot. My mom would say things like, "She's just more sensitive, Megan, you know that." When Amanda would burst into tears over not getting the front seat, while I stood there 5 years old, holding back my own frustration because I'd been told mine was less important. Every birthday party, every school performance, every family gathering had this subtle but inescapable shift toward Amanda, as if everyone in our orbit subconsciously agreed that she deserved more room to exist, to falter, to shine. By the time I turned 13, I had already figured out that fighting for attention was pointless, that the only way to survive was to shrink, to play the quiet daughter who didn't demand, didn't disrupt, didn't ask for explanations when Amanda got a brand new car at 16, while I scraped by with a used bike and a pat on the back. I didn't ask questions when Amanda came home drunk from her first party, and our mom blamed peer pressure. But when I came home 10 minutes late from a movie, I got grounded for a week and told I'd end up pregnant before graduation if I didn't learn some discipline. I knew deep in my bones that there was a script for our family and I hadn't been cast as the lead. And honestly, I might have made peace with that if Amanda had just been good. But she wasn't. See, Amanda had this gift for appearing flawless on the outside while chaos brewed underneath, and nobody, not even my mother, seemed willing to see the cracks. By the time she was 22, Amanda had married her high school sweetheart, a quiet guy named Tyler who worked HVAC and never made waves. They had Lily 2 years later, and for a while, it looked like Amanda was going to do exactly what our mother had always dreamed. The beautiful daughter with the beautiful husband and the beautiful baby living in a town home with granite countertops and a wine fridge. But underneath it all, Amanda was starting to fray. At first it was little things, missed appointments, losing her keys, forgetting birthdays. But soon, the forgetfulness turned into volatility. The sweet girl everyone adored started snapping at her own child in public. And the Amanda we all thought we knew started showing signs that something was deeply, dangerously off. I remember the night she first asked me to watch Lily. I was living in a small apartment, working full-time as a receptionist, barely scraping by. But I said yes because I always said yes when it came to Lily. Amanda dropped her off with a forced smile and a mumbled excuse about needing a night to recharge. But she didn't come back the next morning or the next day or the day after that. I texted, called, even reached out to my mom, who told me not to overreact, that Amanda just needed space. By the end of the week, I had a toddler asking me when mommy was coming home, and a refrigerator half empty of baby food I couldn't afford. Amanda finally texted 4 days later, "I'll be back next week. You're a lifesaver." That wasn't the last time she disappeared. Over the next few months, I became Lily's default caretaker. Amanda would drop her off just for a few days and vanish. Sometimes she'd show up hungover, other times wearing clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks, reeking of a perfume that couldn't quite mask the other smells. Alcohol, stale sweat, maybe even something harder. There were rumors by then, whispers in our hometown about Amanda showing up at parties, losing her job, arguments with Tyler that ended in police visits. When Tyler eventually left, packed his bags and moved 2 states away, I wasn't surprised. What surprised me was how easily Amanda unraveled after that, how fast her grip on reality began to slip. And through all of it, our mother kept making excuses. She's under a lot of stress. She just needs rest. You don't know what it's like to be a single mom. No, I didn't. But I knew what it was like to be the one cleaning up the mess, rocking a crying child to sleep because her mother forgot she had daycare pickup, lying to social workers about how everything was fine, while mentally calculating how long I could cover for Amanda before someone noticed Lily hadn't seen her actual mom in over 2 weeks. The thing is, I didn't do any of this because I was trying to take something from Amanda. I did it because Lily deserved better than the chaos she was born into. And somewhere deep down, I think Amanda knew that too. She just couldn't say it out loud. Not with our mother still whispering in her ear that she was destined for greatness, that this was all temporary, that the world would catch up to her genius if she just held on a little longer. But I knew the truth. I had always known it. Amanda didn't just fall from grace. She was never balanced to begin with. And while everyone else kept pretending the pedestal was still intact, I was the one holding the broken pieces and figuring out how to protect a little girl who didn't ask for any of it. I didn't tell anyone about the night I found Lily curled up in the hallway closet of Amanda's apartment, crying because she didn't like the loud voices, or how she'd started calling me Mama without anyone prompting her to. I didn't tell my mom that I'd begun documenting everything, every missed visit, every emergency call, every daycare incident, because I had a sinking feeling this wasn't just a phase. It was a warning, and eventually it would come to a head, but not yet. Because right then, as far as the rest of the world knew, Amanda was still the golden child, and I was just the backup plan. There are moments you can look back on and realize that something irreversible happened. Not all at once, not with fireworks or a siren or some defining dramatic event, but with a quiet accumulating pressure that builds beneath the surface until, one day, the cracks become impossible to ignore, and the entire structure collapses under its own weight, taking with it whatever illusions you were still clinging to. For Amanda, that collapse didn't look like a movie scene or a single definitive breakdown. It looked like unanswered phone calls, forgotten birthdays, unexplained bruises, a kind of confusion in her eyes that wasn't just exhaustion or sadness. It was disorientation, like someone slowly waking up from a dream they didn't know they were having, only to realize they'd been sleepwalking through the most important moments of their own life. It started, I think, with the pills. Though I couldn't tell you what came first, the anxiety or the prescriptions, the depression or the desperate need to self-medicate. All I know is that, little by little, Amanda changed from someone who could juggle chaos with unsettling ease to someone who couldn't remember what day it was, or why her daughter needed a coat in October. She would drop Lily off with me for a couple nights and vanish for a week, claiming after the fact that she'd had a migraine or a work conference or had lost her phone. Always some explanation that sounded reasonable enough if you didn't know her, but which fell apart under the slightest pressure. I began to keep notes, not because I was trying to build a case, but because I needed to keep track of what was happening, if only to keep myself from doubting my own memory. I wrote down dates, times, incidents. I saved text messages. I kept screenshots of voicemail transcriptions where she'd slur her words, mixing up days, forgetting she'd even dropped Lily off at all. At first, I did it in secret, out of guilt, as if I was betraying her by trying to make sense of her behavior. But guilt quickly gave way to concern, and then concern hardened into something colder, something that felt a lot like fear. The first time I truly felt afraid was a Wednesday in early spring, a day that should have been nothing more than routine. Amanda was supposed to pick Lily up from daycare, and she was late, again. I got the call around 5:40 from the director, who sounded exasperated but not surprised. I told her I'd be there in 10 minutes, and when I arrived, Lily was sitting in the office, eating animal crackers and quietly humming to herself. When I asked where Amanda was, the woman behind the desk handed me a folded note. Apparently, Amanda had shown up briefly earlier that afternoon, just long enough to scream at a staff member about a billing error, then stormed off before signing any forms or taking her daughter. According to the security cameras, Amanda had been disheveled, agitated, and irrational. And when I reviewed the footage the next day, after practically begging them to show me, I saw it with my own eyes. Amanda wasn't just angry, she was unraveling. She slammed her hands on the front desk. She shouted about being followed and accused a confused teacher of lying about her pickup schedule. At one point, she grabbed a stack of parent folders and threw them to the ground. And then, perhaps most damning of all, she screamed at Lily to stop looking at me like that, even though the child was sitting silently, clutching her backpack, eyes wide and motionless. That night, after I got Lily home and settled, I sat in my car in the driveway with the engine off and watched the security footage again on my phone. I don't know what I expected to find, maybe a flicker of clarity, something to explain what I was seeing. But all I saw was a mother frightening her child, and a child who didn't know how to respond to that fear. I didn't call the police. I didn't call my mother. I called Child Protective Services anonymously and told them I had concerns about Amanda's ability to care for her daughter, but I didn't use my name. Not yet. I still wanted to believe there was a version of the story where Amanda got help, where she recovered, and I could step back into the role of supportive sister instead of reluctant guardian. But CPS didn't see it that way. They opened a case within 48 hours, and I found myself on the receiving end of a surprise visit and a whole list of questions I wasn't ready to answer. Why was Lily with me so often? When was the last time Amanda had stayed overnight with her daughter? Had there been any evidence of abuse or neglect? Did I feel the child was in danger? I answered truthfully, or at least I tried to. But the truth felt slippery, incomplete, like no sentence could fully capture the sick feeling I got whenever Amanda called me and asked, in that strange, distracted voice, if Lily had eaten this week. She wasn't being sarcastic. She genuinely didn't know. The investigators asked if I was willing to take temporary custody while they completed their assessment. I said yes before I even thought it through, and just like that, I became more than an aunt. I became the point of contact, the emergency number, the person who signed permission slips and scheduled doctor's appointments and kissed skinned knees and explained why Mommy couldn't come to the dance recital. Amanda didn't react well, as you can probably imagine. She accused me of betrayal, of stealing her daughter, of lying to social workers, and manipulating the system to make her look bad. She said I was jealous, that I'd always wanted what she had, her looks, her life, her child, and maybe, in her twisted way, she believed that. Maybe it was easier for her to invent a villain than to face what was really happening. Our mother, of course, took Amanda's side, insisting that CPS had overstepped, that I should have come to her first, that families don't turn on each other, as if she hadn't spent the last 30 years reinforcing a dynamic where Amanda was always right and I was always wrong, no matter the evidence. What none of them knew, what no one but me knew, was that Amanda's spiral hadn't started 6 months ago. It had started years earlier, back when she began writing in a journal she kept tucked beneath the floorboard of her bedroom closet. A journal I only discovered because Lily had been caught, using the closet as a hiding spot during one of Amanda's outbursts. I opened it not out of curiosity, but out of necessity, hoping it might help me understand what was happening inside my sister's mind. What I found was terrifying. Rambling entries, paranoia, mentions of watchers and coded messages, descriptions of voices telling her to do things she didn't want to do. A recurring phrase, written over and over, "Lily isn't safe." Sometimes it was underlined 3 or 4 times. Sometimes it was followed by sentences I couldn't even read, scribbled over in a frenzy. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just addiction or depression. Something deeper was wrong. Something that couldn't be fixed with time, or tough love, or forgiveness. That was the moment I realized Lily might never be able to go home again. And as awful as it sounds, there was a part of me, a small broken part, that felt relief. Because now, at least, I had something to show. Something to explain why I was stepping in. Something to protect the little girl who had already started calling me mommy when no one else was around. But I also knew that the fight was only just beginning. Amanda wasn't going to let go without a war, and the worst part, our mother was about to pick a side, and she wasn't going to pick mine. By the time the custody paperwork was finalized, I had already lost the version of Amanda I had been trying to save. Not just the sister I'd grown up resenting, admiring, envying, and eventually mothering in all but name, but the person, the woman, who used to hold Lily like she was made of stars and honey, the one who once left voice notes about finger painting accidents and messy bedtime stories with pride in her voice, even when everything else in her life was falling apart. That woman was gone, erased slowly by the kind of unraveling that doesn't leave bruises or broken windows, but instead swallows someone from the inside out, until all that's left are fragments of intention and long trails of destruction nobody knows how to sweep up. Filing for custody wasn't a power move. It wasn't revenge. It was an act of survival, for Lily, first and foremost, and for myself too, because you can only live inside a crisis for so long before it begins to eat away at your own ability to tell right from wrong, guilt from obligation, love from codependency. At some point, you have to make a decision not based on who you used to be or who they used to be, but on who you are right now, and what that version of yourself can live with if everything else falls apart. The court process started small, almost unremarkably. Just a formal motion filed through a social worker, a temporary guardianship request granted, pending investigation. I had no lawyer, no real plan, just an overstuffed manila folder of printed texts, photographs, daycare incident reports, and my own handwritten timeline that made me nauseous every time I reread it. Still, when the first hearing came, I wore a dress I hadn't touched since my job interview at the bank, tied my hair back, and sat upright in the courtroom like I'd been coached, even though no one had coached me. Amanda arrived 20 minutes late, with raccoon eyes, a wrinkled coat, and a paper coffee cup that I'm almost certain wasn't filled with coffee. She didn't look at me, not once. Just kept her head down and chewed on her thumbnail like she could disappear into herself if she kept moving fast enough. The judge asked questions. Amanda answered some, dodged others. When they asked her where she had been the week before Lily was placed with me, she blinked like someone who had just been woken up from a nap she didn't mean to take. Her public defender, who looked younger than my babysitter, fumbled through a statement about temporary housing issues and a lack of recent medical documentation. I sat silently, my hands clenched so tightly they left crescent marks in my palms, listening to strangers describe the life I had been living as though it were a case file, as though the little girl coloring in the waiting room just down the hall wasn't the center of our entire universe. Amanda only broke her silence when the judge asked her if she had anything to say about me personally, about whether she believed I was fit to care for her daughter. She looked up then, met my eyes, and with a voice that sounded like it had been marinating in acid, said, "She's a liar. She's always wanted to ruin me. She's jealous. She wants my child because she can't have her own." It was one of those moments that shouldn't hurt, because you know they're lashing out, you know it's not really about you, and yet it hits like a punch to the stomach anyway, not because you care about the insult, but because you know somewhere, deep down, they believe it. And worse, maybe a part of you has believed it too. That accusation stayed with me long after we left the courthouse, long after the judge ordered a full evaluation, long after CPS made their surprise visits, and the court-appointed psychologist came to interview Lily at our home. It haunted me, not because it was true, but because it was the kind of lie that had just enough emotional glue to stick to the walls of your memory. I started questioning myself in small, cruel ways. Was I trying to replace Amanda? Was I capitalizing on her collapse to fulfill some unspoken longing I hadn't admitted to even myself? Was I making decisions from love or from resentment? It took me weeks to understand that guilt was Amanda's favorite weapon, not because she wielded it with purpose, but because she never learned how to cope without it. In our family, guilt was the currency we all spent to buy each other's loyalty. My mother perfected the art of it, always managing to twist support into sacrifice, twisting concern into betrayal, never openly picking sides but always signaling who she thought deserved sympathy. And Amanda, she learned to weaponize that currency, to twist every consequence into proof that she had been victimized, misunderstood, targeted. When she realized the custody case wasn't going her way, Amanda turned her fury toward me in every imaginable form. She left voicemails accusing me of planting evidence, of paying off CPS workers, of manipulating Lily into loving me more than her. She emailed family members with half-baked rants about legal conspiracies, blaming me, blaming Tyler, blaming the universe. She even showed up at my job one morning, hair wild, mascara smeared, demanding to see her daughter. I had to call security. It was humiliating. My coworkers watched in stunned silence as I escorted her out of the building, her voice echoing down the hallway, telling anyone who would listen that I had stolen her life. The final custody hearing was a quiet affair. Amanda didn't show up. Her lawyer gave some excuse about illness, but we all knew what that meant. I presented my files. The judge read through the documentation. There were no dramatic declarations, no emotional outbursts, just a pen scratching across paper as the gavel came down and my guardianship of Lily was made permanent. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt grief, deep, complicated, nauseating grief for the sister I had lost, for the child who wouldn't get the mother she deserved, for the family that had long since splintered into silence and blame. Afterward, I mailed Amanda a copy of the verdict. I didn't include a note, not at first, but then at the last second, I scribbled a single sentence on a sticky note and pressed it to the front page. "You were right. Lily isn't safe with you." It wasn't meant to be cruel. It was just the truth. A truth she had written in her own diary, over and over again, even if she couldn't face it. And maybe in some way, I wanted her to know that I had read it, that I had understood, that I had acted not out of ambition or envy or punishment, but because someone had to be brave enough to say what she couldn't. My mother didn't speak to me for weeks after the verdict. When we finally spoke, she didn't ask about Lily. She asked if I planned to give Amanda visitation, as if nothing that had happened, none of the missed pickups, none of the threats, none of the unhinged messages, was relevant anymore. "She's your sister," she said flatly, like that single word erased every other fact on record. I told her Lily deserved more than shared bloodlines. She hung up on me, and that should have been the end. A neat, tragic resolution. But then one night, a week before my baby shower, Lily came into my room holding something small in her hand. It was a necklace, silver, tarnished, shaped like a heart with the letter A engraved in the center. She looked up at me and said, "Mommy gave me this, but I didn't tell you because I thought you'd be mad." I froze. Amanda hadn't seen Lily in over 6 months, and suddenly I knew this wasn't over, not even close. The day after the baby shower, while the leftover cupcakes sat stale in their paper wrappers and the discarded tissue paper fluttered across the lawn like colored leaves in a storm, I stood at the kitchen sink, elbow deep in soapy water, staring out the window and trying to make sense of what the hell just happened. Not just the night before when my mother detonated the room with a single sentence, but of the last few years. Years in which my life had been twisted, stretched, and hollowed out in the name of protecting a little girl who never should have needed protection from the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally. I couldn't stop replaying the silence after I dropped that line at the table. Funny, that's what the court thought too, when they gave me custody of her child. A silence so thick and immediate it felt like all the oxygen had been vacuumed out of the backyard, leaving behind only awkward glances and the clink of a fork against a glass as someone tried and failed to change the subject. I should have felt triumphant, maybe even vindicated, but instead I felt raw, like I'd peeled back too many layers of something that was never supposed to be exposed in public. And now all the ugliness was just sitting there on the patio in front of people who'd come for cake and small talk. Still, I didn't regret it. I didn't regret saying the truth out loud. I didn't regret making my mother choke on the pedestal she'd spent 30 years building for Amanda out of denial and desperation. What I did regret was not doing it sooner and not tearing down the fantasy before it had the chance to hurt so many people. That regret turned into something else entirely when Amanda showed up at my door 2 days later. No call, no warning, just a knock in the middle of the afternoon while Lily was napping and I was folding baby clothes in the living room, trying to pretend like everything was settled, like life could go back to a manageable pace now that the shower was behind us. But there she was standing on my porch-paw, her makeup smudged, hair damp with sweat, wearing a jacket that didn't match the weather and holding a familiar envelope, the one I had slipped into the mailbox, marked for Amanda. Do not open until after the shower. She must have found it that night or the morning after, maybe even stolen it from my mother's house. It didn't matter. What mattered was that she'd read it, and she was shaking. She didn't scream, she didn't cry, she didn't even step inside. She just looked at me like I was the one who'd lost my mind and said, "You think this makes you a hero?" I told her I wasn't interested in being a hero, that all I'd ever wanted was for Lily to be safe and stable, to be raised in a home where she didn't have to choose between loyalty and survival. Amanda laughed, cold, brittle, humorless, and said, "You don't get it. You never got it. Mom set me up to fail, and you just waited in the wings to pick through the wreckage." I stood there stunned, not because she was wrong about our mother, but because she was so damn close to the truth without ever touching it. I told her what she didn't want to hear, that our mother had known about her condition for years, had seen the warning signs during college when Amanda started locking herself in closets and refusing to eat, that there had been a diagnosis long before Lily was even born. But Janice refused to let anyone talk about it, refused to believe that her perfect daughter could be struggling with something as permanent and terrifying as a mental illness. Amanda blinked, stepped back like I'd slapped her, and muttered, "You're lying." But there was a flicker in her eyes, something beneath the rage that told me she had always suspected it. I reached into my pocket and handed her a folded copy of the report I'd found buried in our mother's filing cabinet months earlier, an old psychological evaluation dated from Amanda's junior year of college, signed by a licensed psychiatrist, stating plainly that Amanda had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder with psychotic features, and that without consistent medication and therapy, she posed a danger to herself and potentially others. I'd found it by accident, searching for Lily's vaccination records. Our mother had buried it beneath tax receipts and expired warranties, as if hiding it could make it disappear. Amanda scanned the document, her lips trembling. For a moment, she looked like the girl I used to know, the girl who believed she could conquer the world with a pair of dance shoes and a perfect smile. Then her face hardened again. "So what? That doesn't make you a mother, Shah," she spat. "That doesn't make you her." I didn't argue, I didn't yell. I simply stepped aside and told her, "Come around back." She hesitated, then followed me through the side gate, into the yard where the remnants of the baby shower still clung to the hedges, and the cheap streamers danced in the breeze. My closest friends had returned that afternoon to help clean up, and a few of them were sitting on the patio, sipping lemonade and pretending not to stare, when Amanda appeared at my side like a ghost resurrected. I stepped up onto the deck, held the folder in the air, and said, "Everyone, Amanda's here to pick up the gift I got her." The group went silent, unsure if they were witnessing a breakdown or some kind of performance art. I opened the folder, held up the report, and added, "It's her diagnosis, finally in writing. Took me 5 years, but I figured she should have something to open to." There was no applause, no laughter, just an eerie quiet, broken only by Amanda's sharp inhale as she turned and stormed back through the gate, knocking over a lawn chair in her path. My mother ran after her, because of course she did, but no one else moved. No one tried to stop me. No one said a word. After a long pause, I walked over to Lily, who had been watching the entire thing from the porch swing, with that calm, preternatural stillness she'd adopted after too many years of emotional earthquakes. I held out my hand, and she took it without hesitation. "Let's get cake," I told her, voice soft but steady. "I think Mommy needs it more than anyone today." She smiled, but before we turned to go inside, she looked up at me with those big eyes that always seemed to see more than a child her age should, and asked, "Are you going to send me away like you did her?" The question hit me like a freight train. Not because it was unfair, but because it was honest in a way most adults couldn't manage. I wanted to promise her that I'd never let anything bad happen again, that this house was her forever home, that no matter what chaos knocked at our door, she would never be abandoned or traded or erased. But I knew better than to make promises in absolutes, not after everything we'd seen, everything we'd survived. So instead, I just squeezed her hand a little tighter and said, "Not unless you start flipping tables at baby showers." She giggled, and the sound of it, light and unburdened, was the closest thing to hope I'd felt in years. We walked inside together, through the door I had bolted shut 1,000 times before, not against danger, but against history, against the ghosts of what we were told to believe, against the idea that family means unconditional acceptance, even when it's toxic, even when it's cruel. And though nothing about that moment was perfect, it was real. And for once, that was enough.